Great, thanks everyone, and thanks for the opportunity to join the conversation this morning. It's been a great dialogue so far. I'm going to be switching gears a little bit and now talking about climate change and adaptation for water utilities. And I'm going to share with everyone some of the activities that we've been up to with the Water Utility Climate Alliance. And the Alliance is a group of 12 utilities that are working together on climate adaptation. We range from Seattle to Tampa Bay and New York down to San Diego. And our vision is for climate resilient water utilities, thriving communities. And it's our mission to collaboratively advance water utility climate change adaptation. And we have a plethora of information on our website that I'm going to talk about more at the end, wucaonline.org, but I encourage you to check that out. So I'm going to share with you about 3 different projects. Some are in progress, some are continuous, and some are being completed. And I want to share with these projects with you because I think they're going to be really helpful as you think about what it means to prepare for climate, to prepare for climate change, and to really build resilience throughout your organization. So the first project I want to talk about, and this is a project we're working on with Julie Vano, who's on the call as well, and it's leading practices in climate adaptation. And the goal of this project is to develop these leading practices, and the practices are grounded in experience, so real world experience, things that's working on the ground. And the goal is to spur innovations within and across utilities and to also spur action throughout the adaptation community more broadly. So as part of this project, we defined what climate adaptation means, and we identified these 5 different categories. And it's much bigger than what we've been talking about so far today and yesterday. We talked a lot about the information you need and the tools you need to do your analysis to inform operational decisions. But when it comes to building resilience, there's communication that's involved, so that falls in our engage category, where we're trying to communicate internally and externally. You need to have the right messages for the right audiences. You are also trying to motivate the application of science and forward motion on climate adaptation. Another category we have is the understand category, and everything that we've done today and yesterday really fits in this understand category, where we recognize we need to understand climate science, both the capabilities and limitations. We need to understand our systems, both the systems that we manage and the watersheds that our water comes from, and our interrelations with other people's systems and other uses. We need to understand our vulnerabilities, risks, and opportunities, and think about how those change over time as the climate continues to warm. In some cases, our risks and opportunities are going to be enhanced, and in some cases, new risks and opportunities are going to emerge. Another part of the climate adaptation spectrum is incorporating climate change into planning and changing the way we do planning to ensure we're prepared for whatever the future may be. So we encourage people to plan for multiple futures. And in following these kind of deep uncertainty techniques, decision-making under deep uncertainty techniques, you're building technical capacity throughout your organization to both think about the long term, as well as think about climate and climate change, and what that means to different parts of the business. Of course, we need to implement the actions that we're making. We need to make changes and make new investments in our assets and our operations and our management. And our assets are not just the physical infrastructure that we have, it's also our human assets as well. How do we make sure people are protected from the heat extremes and heat waves that we're going to continue to experience and are going to continue to get worse over time. And then, of course, we want to sustain the work that we're doing. So thinking about your funding and your budgets, how do you more formalize a potential program? That type of thing is a sustain part of climate adaptation. So it's the same idea. You need all of these aspects when you're, adopting anything into an organization. But this is really focused in on building climate resilience throughout our industry. So I'm going to give you a couple of examples of the leading practices, and we're calling them leading practices instead of best practices because we anticipate that these practices are going to change over time as this is an emerging and evolving field. So the first category, again, was the engage category. So this is the communication piece. And there's a great example from Central Arizona Project to create champions throughout the organization by incorporating people from across the organization in a project where they were trying to develop a climate adaptation plan for their organization. So the practice is to seek out and support climate champions through your utility, and you can do this in lots of different ways. We found that just having the conversation and building a slight knowledge base with people on climate change allows them to start incorporating climate change into the meetings that they're having and the regular agendas that they're setting in conversations they're having with their teams. Understanding, a leading practice and understanding is to foster sustained relationships with the science community. And I really encourage everyone to try to make sure and connect with the Western Water Assessment. They're a great resource for our region, but having that personal connection with the group is really fundamental to be able to move forward in climate, because there's new science always emerging and there's lots of new inquiries that come up, and having that resource at your fingertips is instrumental to being able to in a timely manner move forward in your climate work. Tampa Bay brings PhD candidates into their organization, so it keeps them tied with the research community and their universities, and it also gives them more hands on the ground to help with their climate adaptation work. A good leading practice for the plan category is to leverage the power of a well-placed climate change screening question. So in this example, San Francisco Public Utility Commission has incorporated climate questions focused on sea level rise into their capital planning screening. So they help you think about if sea level rise is important to the capital project they're focusing on, how much sea level rise they need to prepare for, and if the asset is vulnerable and what they need to do associated with that. Southern Nevada Water Authority and Keely Brooks, who is a WUCA member and one of the past WUCA chairs, who's on this call. So if you have questions about this, we can pop those over to her. They have brought warming, so summertime warming, into their enterprise risk management framework. So their enterprise risk management framework is, follows the basic process where it looks at hazards, financials, operations, and strategic aspects of risk management, and they're overlaying this continued warming to better understand how those hazards and risks change over time. New York City, they have a great example for the sustain, and this leading practice is to make a business case for climate adaptation. And what they were able to show is following Superstorm Sandy, if they were to invest in flood protection as well as redoing some of their retrofits and building codes, they could spend a couple $100 million to save an avoided potential losses in damages of over $2 billion over the next 50 years. So pretty significant, huge amount of value and important to know when you're trying to build the case. Okay, so the next project I want to talk about that's relevant for this audience is a training that WUCA put together with the EPA and other partners. And the vision of this training is to help to create smart users and consumers of climate information. We want to encourage people actually moving forward and taking action on climate planning, embracing uncertainty and moving forward in the context of deep uncertainty. So deep uncertainty is this idea that we are not able to predict how the climate is going to change. Rather, we need to understand how it could change and prepare for a range. And then we also wanted to set up folks to be able to effectively communicate about climate. So this information is all on our website, and I'll show you that in just a minute. But the topics in this training, what we have highlighted are climate science. So we learn about predictions versus projections, talk about the uncertainty associated with climate change and climate science and climate modeling. And we talk about the capabilities and limitations of climate models. We dive into downscaling, And we show that downscaling provides this local scale information, but we really encourage people not to mistake precision with accuracy, right? So it doesn't, just because you have high resolution information doesn't mean it's more skillful in predicting what the future will be for your region. We talked about the value of hydrologic modeling to understand your local systems and water resources. We talk about making decisions in the light of uncertainty and talk through adaptation planning mechanisms. We spend a good session, we have a great session on decision making under deep uncertainty that helps people think about how to plan for a range of plausible futures. And figuring out a plan that will work across that range instead of saying, I'm going to guess what the future will be, and optimizing a plan to meet that future. And then we end with a bunch of evidence-based communication strategies and talking through the value of evidence-based solutions. And then, of course, we remind everyone that when you're communicating about a new topic, especially a controversial topic, it takes practice, it takes a lot of repetition and time. And we're really dealing with a marathon, not a sprint when it comes to communicating climate. So the last project I want to share with you all is an engineering case study project. And Taylor Winchell from Denver Water, who's on this call and part of WUCA, and Keely Brooks were part of this project. And we wanted to demonstrate how engineers and water managers are practically applying climate change information to redesign our facilities and our assets to increase climate resilience and to reduce risks to infrastructure. So we put together these pithy 2-pagers, and we have 8 different case studies that we focused on. And the areas included drought, heat extremes, flooding, rising sea storm surges, and extreme rainfall. And the example that I have over here is the example from Colorado, our dam safety program from the state increased our PMP estimates by 7%. And this is just based in fundamental physics that a warmer atmosphere will hold more water. So we should anticipate extreme events to be greater producing events in the future. So we want to make sure our dams can withstand that and we're safe and prepared. And these are 2-pagers, and on the back of the page, but I don't have an example of right now, talks about stakeholder involvement, the pros and cons of this, and also gives contact information for the folks who are part of these or help develop these case studies. So I like to joke that WUCA has a white paper for that, because we do. We have lots of white papers, and they're all practical resources. So if you want to learn more about climate science, we have a climate modeling white paper. If you want to learn more about planning for a range of future conditions, we have another white paper. We have case studies on how people are embracing uncertainty and moving forward without perfect information. We have actionable science in practice, which is great examples of co-production between climate scientists and water practitioners to develop tools we need to assess our risks. We look at risks to built infrastructure. We're talking about how to talk about climate change. And then we have an annual report on what we're working on in a strategic plan. And then we have several other projects that I didn't highlight here that are also available there. So that's the end of that presentation. But I want to quickly go to the WUCA website if you guys can see it. Do you see my screen change?
No, it still shows the PowerPoint, but maybe you have to stop and then start again with the browser.
Yep, okay.
Cool.
Yeah, so this is our WUCA webpage. And you can see over here we have a menu, so it can go through there's lots of different informational pieces there, but what I wanted to highlight are these training materials. So I talked about that as the second example. So if we go to the Portland training, for example, there's PDFs of all these presentations. So climate science for water professionals, downscaling bias correction and translating hydrology. So we're in the process right now of turning all these materials into virtual modules. We're working on this with EPA and NOAA. We're hoping to have something ready to go by the end of the year. it doesn't replace doing these trainings in person. We'll host another one in Colorado in 2 years from now, I think, when we can actually meet in person again. But we're excited to be able to bring this material to a broader audience. So with that, I encourage you to check out our webpage, see what else we have to offer, and just a few key messages. Warming is here and now. You need to know your system and explore your vulnerabilities. You need to plan for multiple futures, and building capacity and doing assessments are also part of the adaptation spectrum. It's not just looking at your vulnerability to climate change. So with that, I guess I'll turn it over to any questions.